G'day YouTube, Warbles Not a Lot here. Welcome to Sunday afternoon. I cannot claim to be sober, so you better think of this as a malt liquor video, because here goes number 4. There you go. Cooper's Sparkling Ale, 1.7 standard drunks, 5.8% alcohol. I don't know whether this video is going to be about how good small towns are. I don't know whether it's going to be about telling the horror, and I don't know whether it's going to be about the world's worst parenting skills. But anyway, here's the story. 20 odd years ago, I met a young fella. 19 years ago, when he told me that he had a girlfriend and they were pregnant and they were going to do the happy families thing, I kept on being friends with them. As a regular thing, on Friday nights, I drop in and I visit. And, all kinds of things have changed. Like his missus has left. The kids sort of float between the two of the parents. And this bloke's at least 15 years younger than me. A bit more, perhaps. He has a friend. They went to school together. And when I first met the friend, I thought he was pretty hard to put up with, actually. He was obviously very intelligent once upon a time, but apparently he'd suffered a head injury. Personally, I've had 2 head injuries, and I like to think I'm still intelligent. So, yeah, I could relate to that. So I cut him a bit of slack. And the friend of my friend, he had big dogs. You know how some people have big dogs? Well, I'm not one of those people. My idea of an efficient dog is a fox terrier. If you actually have a look and you measure the length of the teeth and the size of the jaws and how hard they can bite, there's no point in feeding something as big as a Rottweiler, because a fox terrier can actually do as much biting. If you want to have the most efficient dog, you have a fox terrier. I had a fox terrier when I was a kid. But anyway, the friend of my friend had a couple of big dogs. And he and I didn't get along real well for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is because his grandfather and my father were personal enemies. They really disliked each other. They were in business in kind of the same field, and they used to put a lot of disrespectful stories out about each other. So I'm, doing my best to be friends with this bloke despite ancestral tendencies. And I don't have a dog, and he's got 2 big ones, or he had 2 big ones when I first met him. Well, anyway, every Friday night, me and my daughter turn up to my friend's place, and his friend has been there off and on over the years for 7 odd years. And first he had 2 dogs, and then kind of he got a girlfriend, and he didn't show up for a long time. And then he and the girlfriend split up, and the older of his 2 dogs died. And he'd been looking after his father and getting a carer's pension for it. And when his father died, he lost his carer's pension, and that was just after one of his dogs died. And when he lost his carer's pension, he had to ask his girlfriend to contribute to the rent. So she pissed off, which left him with 1 dog and a house that he really couldn't afford to live in, but he needed to have a house because you can't have a dog in a flat. Okay, so he's doing it really hard, like he had a very, very depressing 2016. And he was kind of coming out of it, and, he was getting his life together, and I had never visited him at his house because we always used to meet up at the mutual friend's house. Okay, now his remaining big dog might have weighed 120 pounds, 50 kilos. He was a big dog, waist high on me. I thought he was a Rhodesian Ridgeback until it was pointed out that, like the hair on his back doesn't stand up. He's just the right colour and he's the right size, The The sort of dog that if you trained it as a pig dog, he would have been a champion. The thing is, he'd been raised as a puppy by this bloke who, once upon a time he was really smart, but he had a head injury and that kind of knocked him back a bit, and he self-medicated and he got into bad company, and it was hard sometimes to know which one was in command. Like, was the dog telling him where to go, or was he telling the dog what to do? And this dog, despite the fact that he was a carnivore and I obviously smelled like a herbivore because all the animals in my life are herbivores, and despite the fact that sometimes I would be yelling and getting red in the face and standing up and waving my arms at this great big dog's owner. And, he'd stand up out of his chair, and we would disagree on something fiercely because, I'm a greenie and he's not so much. But, we all sort of got along together, and the dog would come up to me and sit in front of me and put his paw up on my knee and press fairly hard on my knee as he pulled his paw down past it. And what he wanted me to do was scratch his ears. He wanted me to play, like interact with him. He was a dog who liked human interaction. A great, big, galumping, gentle dog who thought he was okay to sit on people's laps because he was allowed to when he was a puppy, and now he weighs 120 pounds. So he's learnt to camp on the floor, but he was still a very, very friendly dog, a very intelligent dog, a dog who understood a lot about what was going on. So I went to my friend on Friday night, and his friend was sitting on the step looking absolutely shattered. He'd aged 20 years since I'd seen him a week earlier. And the big news was that the previous night, Thursday night, his best mate, his little mate, George, the great big dog, he'd been in the car and the car had burnt to the ground and the dog died. So yesterday, me and my friend and his new girlfriend and his son, who's just about nearly old enough to drive, we went around there and we tried to spare old mate the burden of having to remove his dog from what was left of the car, and what was left of his dog from what was left of the car. So I set off for town, towing the trailer with a winding sheet and some ropes and some disposable gloves, as well as a shovel and a mattock, and a more than 100-year-old railway fettler's crowbar. And me and the teenager succeeded in bending my ancestral crowbar, trying to separate the floor mat which was attached to old mate George, and try and get that out of the car. So we kind of covered him in the winding sheet in the car, and we more or less gave up for a while. And for 3/4 of an hour, I thought we were going to have to get a backhoe to dig a hole big enough to bury the car with George in it, because we couldn't think of any way to get him out of the car. And then a brainwave occurred. Perhaps the local Volunteer Rescue Association could be persuaded to take this on as a training exercise. So yay team, Glen Innes Volunteer Rescue Association. Some phone calls were made. 2 blokes showed up with literally 4,500 pounds per square inch hydraulic powered jaws of life, like parrot's beak of pinchiness or whatever. And it took them 3/4 of an hour to get the dog out of the car. It went on for a lot longer, so it was kind of worse than having to identify my best friend in a body bag after he crashed his ultralight. It was, oh man, it was bad. But we were there doing it, and there was, like I said, there was me and three other people. Two of them were with me at the car with the rescue squad, and one was inside keeping the fella whose dog had been burnt to death away from the scene because he did not need to see that. So on the one hand, I kind of feel like I failed, though I kind of got a bit chopped up trying to use a pocket knife to cut away the floor mat from the car. But on the other hand, it was my idea to ask the rescue squad if they could show up and save the day. And they did. And they did. And a donation was made to their Christmas party fund or whatever because they really did save the day. But I really want to comment on one aspect that really sticks out. I was there as an ancestral family enemy of this bloke, helping him out because I'd met him socially and I'd learned to kind of like him. The other three people were there because he went to school with one of them, and the other two, like one was a son of the bloke he went to school with, the other one was a girlfriend of the bloke he went to school with. The fire brigade turned up to put out the burning car. It had been burning so intensely that the dog's owner couldn't get close enough to open a door, and the door handles were plastic, so they'd burned off anyway. He has blisters. He's bent over and hacking and coughing because of all of the toxic smoke that he breathed in trying to get to his car to open the door to release his dog. When the fire brigade turned up, he went for a walk and he turned up at his mother's house and he knocked on the door in tears and he was trying to tell her what his problem was. And guess what she said? So I'm told, and I have no reason to disbelieve it. She said, "Pull yourself together, stop making a scene in the street. If you don't calm down, I will call the police." And when he couldn't calm himself down because he was coughing his lungs up from the toxic plastic smoke that he'd just been breathing while getting burnt trying to save his best friend, that's when she said, "That's it, I'm calling the police." And she went inside and she called the bloody police on her own son. And she sent her recombinant Brady Bunch boyfriend out to tell her son what an asshole he was for daring to come and disturb his mother in the middle of the night. And you know what? I live in a little country town. And I've had lectures on slander, libel, and defamation of character, and I'm really, really careful to have not mentioned anybody's names in this. And nobody who does not already know the protagonist is capable of identifying anybody concerned. But here's the thing I want to point out. Until yesterday, the worst parent I know of, or I knew of, was my wife. Right? Now I've got to say I know somebody who's a worse parent than my wife, because if any of my wife's children, my two, her four, if they had gone up to her in tears in the middle of the night, she would have given them a cuddle and asked them what was wrong. She would not have called the police on them. So anyway, my final word on this, as a parent, as a member of the community, as an individual, as a human, is if your child comes to you in the middle of the night in tears, give them a cuddle, ask them what's wrong, pat them on the back, and do not call the police. If you want to get right down to it, probably the best way to look at it is that In a little country town, 4 people and 2 strangers came together. 4 people who knew the dog, 4 people who knew the dog's owner, 2 strangers. We came together to prevent him from having to try and deal with that situation, which was totally beyond his ability.